Hello and good morning. I'm Bart Poulson, and it's morning here in Salt Lake City, Utah, where I am. And I am thrilled to be joined today by Dr. Natalie Nixon of Figure Eight Thinking, where we're going to talk about creativity and about data work as well. And I have lots of things to say about that. But before we get started, two things. Number one, is I want to remind you that we also record these events, and the recording will be available immediately afterwards on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on YouTube. Second, if you are logged in live, we would love for you to make a comment and say hello and tell us where you are in this world, because we tend to get people from a lot of different places. And so if you're there, I would love to hear from you. But I think the best use of our time right now would to give Natalie a few minutes to introduce herself and to tell us about her work in the creativity consulting world, which is not something that people always put together, but it's been a great thing for her. So Natalie, please tell us about yourself and tell us about your work.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Bart, for inviting me to have a conversation with you. And I love the intro music for two reasons, very, very interrelated to me personally in my work. The jazzy take on tango. So jazz improvisation is something that's been very pivotal in building my body of work, because I looked in my doctoral research at the ways that the Ritz-Carlton Hotel designs experiences that don't just satisfy us, but delight us through the lens of jazz improvisation, because it turns out that the most innovative organizations are improvisational organizations. And if you understand that through the lens of jazz music, it's like life-changing and super interesting. The second thing is that I study ballroom dance, and so hearing that tango was really cool. But I am a creativity strategist, which means that I help organizations and leaders apply creativity's ROI for better business results. And that's because there's not a fuzzy dotted line between creativity and business impact, but there's a solid bold line. And primarily because creativity is actually the engine for innovation. And innovation is an invention converted into scalable value. And that value could be social value, financial value, cultural value. But the way you go from a one-off invention to that scalably valuable innovation is through creativity. And when I share that with people, they're like, okay, but I'm not creative. Hopefully they don't think that, but if they do think that, my big job is to detract them from that kind of thinking, because it turns out that to be human is to be hardwired to be creative. And that creativity is not only in the domain of artists or designers, but the best cognitive scientists and computer scientists and data analysts and attorneys and CPAs and et cetera, and farmers and plumbers are super creative when they're doing this toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. So
is the name of your workshop. We're going to talk more about that. So I would love it if you could talk a little bit more about those two specific things, the wonder and the rigor.
Sure. The wonder dimension of creativity, people come by naturally. They're like, oh yeah, of course. You need a lot of wonder to be creative. And wonder is actually not woo-woo. Wonder is actually something that Socrates paid a lot of attention to. So he, for example, said that that wonder is the root of wisdom. And then centuries later, the Jewish theologian and civil rights activist Abraham Heschel wrote that it's wonder and not doubt, which is the root of all knowledge. So if you want to become more knowledgeable and wiser, you need to design more space and more time for wonder. And wonder is about awe and audacity and deep curiosity and pausing, because it's really hard to wonder when you're going 80 miles an hour. Now, rigor is the counterpoint to wonder in any creative act. And rigor is about focus, discipline, skill mastery, time on task. Rigor is not particularly sexy. It's often done in a very solitary way, but it is essential for mastery. And the best athletes know about this balance of wonder and rigor. The best musicians know about this. The best scientists know that they must have equally healthy doses of both wonder and rigor. So the intermixing of those two domains is a big contribution of what I do in my keynote speaking, in my advisory work, because it's a really helpful reframe, and it just becomes a game changer in how people begin to approach their work.
You know, this is an inappropriate analogy, but it is reminding me of a line that I think is from Hemingway, who says to write drunk and edit sober.
Oh, okay. I like that. That's the idea.
But the idea is when you're creating, you don't inhibit, you don't judge yourself. You are putting it down, you're getting it out there. Just go, 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 go. He says, but that is not sufficient. You do have to edit it.
You
And
do have to edit it.
you need to be fully cognitively functional when you're editing.
But I don't know about you, Bart. I know that you have a very creative approach to the way you go about teaching, explaining data science, and that your point about you need to go, go, go. I find there's some days when it's hard for me to be uninhibited in my thinking. I have the negative Nancy or negative Natalie on my shoulder, just totally censoring me and saying, no one's gonna think that's interesting. That doesn't make any sense, or why would you even consider that or write that down, right? So that's actually a rigorous process to allow yourself to engage in the flow of wonder. And so there's a expression I created, which is kind of this. I'm forgetting the word I meant to use, but it's this idea that wonder is found in the midst of rigor. And rigor cannot be sustained without wonder.
Oh, that's wonderful.
They're copacetic, right? When I say wonder is found in the midst of rigor, whenever you are in the middle of a really challenging, tedious task, it's often then that you have those aha moments. That's the wonder that's in the midst of the rigor. And then rigor can't be sustained without wonder. We will burn out if we are only spending our time in the weeds and minutia and don't put our heads up into the clouds every now and then.
That's beautiful. Let me connect this for just a moment, because I know that you work with a really wide range of people and organizations, and I want to ask you about some of those, but let me connect this just for a moment to the data world. Now, I teach statistics, I teach data science, although interestingly, my degree is in social psychology and I work in the psychology and counseling department. But, and my background, I spent most of my life planning on being a designer. So I did take drawing classes and color theory classes. People in data work, you think of it as a technical field where there's a correct answer and they kind of go do step 1, step 2, step 3, get through it. But the technical aspect is not even close to the hard part of data work. I think the two or three hardest parts of data work are, number one, asking a worthwhile question. Number two, interpreting your data in a meaningful way. What's going on here? Why did we see what we saw? And number three is, and what can we do usefully with it? And, none of those are technical questions that you can just if I do this procedure, I'll get the right answer to that. Those all require the creativity. Again, asking a useful or worthwhile question, making sense, interpreting the data, the results that you found, and then applying them. Those are the hard parts of the data work. I have worked with professional data scientists from around the world who were extraordinarily technically gifted, but unfortunately, because their training never emphasized those three aspects, they tended to crash and burn on them.
Right.
And I assume that's something that you have found as well.
Oh, I love how you just outlined that. And the way I would, in my type of beautiful brain versus your type of beautiful brain, the way I would distill that is the first dimension, which you said you need to be able to be really good at asking questions, is you need to be able to ask why, what if, those really big, ginormous, juicy questions. The second phase is the so what, right? So okay, now we have this interesting algorithm or code, the so what, the application, and then the next part is now what, right? Now what are we going to do with it? So it's what if, so what, and then now what is how I
That,
think.
do you know what? That is so nice. I'm going to do this.
Let's co-author a blog about that. I think that would be really cool. Let's do it,
I
because
love that.
that's the process that the encoding in any sort of exploratory work. I mean, my husband John is an attorney, and he similarly has to think through problem solving, and then they were all problem solving, hopefully,
Mhm.
and that kind of loose process. But I love and appreciate that you couched the work of data science in really in terms of question framing and curiosity. Curiosity is a fundamental ageless skill. It will become increasingly important in this time of ubiquitous technology, because as my friend and colleague Warren Berger, who writes these great books about curiosity, he wrote a great book called A More Beautiful Question. But as Warren Berger likes to say, questions are a way of thinking. And unfortunately, the way we've been educated is to have a better answer instead of a better question.
Mhm.
Questions are inputs into a system, is how I like to think about it. And when you get really good at asking questions, you actually are becoming a better systems designer. You're becoming better at seeing the interconnectedness and interrelatedness between things. You'll get to the answer, not even the answer, but the answers, the multiple possible future scenarios that can be built out that start with a gem of a really great question or two.
You know, I'm sure you're familiar with the line that is attributed to Picasso that says, "Computers are useless. They can only give you answers."
Oh, I don't know that one. I know inspiration exists, but it has to find you working.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. He had a lot of good quips.
Yeah. Now, I do want to mention a few other things for those of you who are watching here. Number one, now all of these links are in the event description, but I do want you to be aware Natalie is, of course, on LinkedIn, as am I. And second, she is also one of my LinkedIn Learning colleagues that we both make courses for LinkedIn Learning. She's done several on creativity. She also has, I think, your main gig is your own company, which is Figure Eight Thinking.
Yeah.
And that's the consulting arm. And they are running the workshop, which you get by following down the Wonder Rigor Ideas Lab.
Yes.
And those are workshops. I want to show those to you in, actually, let me see if I can successfully share my screen.
Thank you.
Which is always an iffy proposition. Okay, we're going to go to a window and we're going to try to do this one. First off, this is my little thing that has her links. But what I want you to see is, okay, is this working as intended? Here is her page on LinkedIn. Here are her courses, her current courses at LinkedIn Learning. But, stay posted. Things change, things evolve.
More to come.
Yep. Okay, here is the main page at Figure Eight Thinking. And I love this one. Creativity is not nice to have, it's must have. I love that. And then right here is, if we scroll down a little, well, I'm just going to click on this next link, is the Wonder Rigor Ideas Lab Bootcamp.
Yes.
And the opportunity to, now I want you to see, this is coming up in just a few weeks, folks.
Yes.
And
this is February 6th.
Yep.
And we're offering several free webinars. So the boot camp is not free, but Bart, because I love you and your work so much, I am extending to all of your viewers and listeners a really exclusive 20% discount to the February 6th boot camp. And anyone who's listening wants to exactly use the bootcamp 20 code when you check out, and all the information is on this link. If you just go to the figureeightthinking.com website, under advisory, the first link will take you to the boot camp. But the reason why we're launching these boot camps is because we're finding that people need really practical, tangible skills and tools to help them not only problem solve, but also consistently and sustainably reimagine what's possible, reimagine what's essential, and reimagine what's transformative. And if you listen to those three words I just used, what's possible, what's essential, what's transformative, I'm doing a little Wonder Rigger ninja trick there, because wonder is about what's possible, right? What's essential, like what really matters, what's the very next thing we need to do, getting really tactical and grounded. That's the rigor. And those things combined are transformative. So what the boot camp on February the 6th is going to be really great for. It's going to be good for people who are existing or emerging leaders who need to build their creative confidence and want to have really practical tools and skills to address a problem. You bring the problem to boot camp, and I'm going to work with the group with this framework that I've developed, this Wonder Rigger framework, to help you think through it differently. You're going to walk away with some actionable steps. It's 3 hours on February 6th. And thank you so much for letting me share about it.
Thank you. Tell me, give us an example of some of the insights that people, especially the transformative part, if you can give an example of these 3 steps, the possible, essential, transformative, a quick, like 3-minute case study of somebody that you've worked with.
Yeah. So I don't do consulting anymore. I typically do high-end strategic advisory work with executive teams who are ready to hit the pause button, want to zoom out and engage in big blue sky thinking and land with some practical, actionable steps. So I really help teams to dream much bigger. And so an example would be a global law firm I worked with that wanted to normalize curiosity. You can imagine that in a lot of law firms of executive leadership teams, they got to where they are because they were a bit A-type. I also am a bit A-type, but personality, really good at filling in the dots, acing the exam and proceeding in kind of what may feel like a linear fashion, but what got you here won't get you there. And so that I loved that question and that problem they came to me with, because when you think about so many organizations have much more of a punitive culture where it comes to curiosity and asking questions. So many of us have been question shamed at some point in our learning experiences, in our early work environments where we dared to raise our hand and it might have been slapped a bit, or we were ignored, which feels pretty awful, or we got giggles. And again, I repeat, asking questions is a way of thinking, and questions are inputs into a system. The more diverse the questions, the more innovative the output. So that's an example of an advisory project that I worked on with a law firm, a global law firm, to help them make question asking a part of the culture, making curiosity a part of the culture. So it didn't feel so punitive, but they it was the beginning of being more experimental and exploratory in problem solving for their clients.
Let me bring that one to data, because that's where a lot of my audience is. There are these ideas that there is a correct way to analyze data. That's never true. That's like saying there's a correct way to tell a story. Because there's a correct way to take a photograph. Yeah, there are tips, there are ideas, but oh my goodness, there's a million different ways to do it. And I know that some of the common procedures that are used, you say like, well, look, you have a PhD, and for instance, that you can do a statistical test that compares 2 different groups. Well, what you're comparing is the average.
Right.
But maybe the average isn't what you really care about. Maybe it's the outliers. Maybe it's the exceptional cases, in which case you have to choose a whole different approach to do it. And so you have to say, is this the question that we want to answer? Is this the one we really care about? And similarly, in the data science world, a lot of algorithms are developed for classification purposes. The classical example is this a spam email or a real email? Is this a fraudulent transaction or a legitimate transaction? I mean, those are important things to know, but you can develop a model that has very high classification accuracy, but gives you no insight. And you say like, well, we already knew that. The building I am in right now, most of this space is owned by uh, a a bio farm company called Recursion, and they specialize in really orphan diseases. And they can say, and you can say like, look, nobody's going to get this disease because it only affects, like 1/100th of 1% of the population. So we can just say nobody has it, and we'll be accurate almost all the time. That's not what we're concerned about. We want to know who has this disease, and more accurately, how can we treat it? Now, their major contribution is they developed this amazing technology that allows them to test thousands of drugs that have already been FDA approved against thousands of diseases. There are so many possibilities. They've developed an automated procedure that can do, I think, millions of tests each week.
Wow.
It's extraordinary. And it is a creative thing because their creativity has been, drug development is so expensive. Can we find another solution? They said, let's use existing drugs that have already been FDA approved. Second, how can we test? Is it we got to scale up, we got to scale up, we got to scale up. And so the robotics and automation, but mostly the technology to analyze the results. That's where their major contribution is. And the way that they're able to find novel solutions using existing things to important questions. But it does involve changing the question. We're not looking at the largest group. We're looking at this very specific group, and we're trying to find this creative. Anyhow, it makes me think about the creativity that you're talking about is what has been central to their success.
Well, the other thing I hear you saying is how important it is to lean into what we can learn from the margins, from what's on the margins. So that's a great example. The work in Bangladesh of microfinance is a great example. The work of the Tata Automotive Company in India is a great example. So the Tata Auto started with a question of first an observation of a growing middle class in India. I lived in Sri Lanka many years ago, worked in the global fashion industry for a division of the limited brands. It was not uncommon to see a family of 5 riding on a scooter where Papa's in front, toddlers in front of Papa, 2 other little kids between Pop and Mom in the back, and they're humming along, going about their daily business. But that's not uncommon to see in a lot of parts of Southeast Asia. But Tata said, well, what if we could design a car that was affordable for this particular psychodemographic, safe, so affordability, safety, and appealing to them. Right. And so they kind of reverse engineered existing cars and got to a car that actually, that kind of minimal viable product, there was so much more that the bigger and also Western automotive companies could learn from. The microfinancing work is those models of financing or things that can be scaled to other parts of the world. So I love that point about leaning into the margins and the tail of the bell curve. The other thing I want to say, I'm a qualitative researcher, and I really believe that the best data is the quant and the qualitative intercombined, because I know maybe not a lot of quants want to hear this, but from my humble view, quantitative research is only a portion of the story. It's giving us the bird's eye view, right? It's showing us the patterns, which is incredibly valuable. One thing we have to remember that when people answer surveys, they're self-reporting, right? So that's already a bit of a fallacy. But also that those patterns that we see from that bird's eye view don't tell us why there's this incremental shift at point T20 versus point T56. Why all of a sudden was there shift in behavior? So we have to dive down and have the worm's eye view, which comes from qualitative research, where you do deep observation and interviewing. So either one on its own only tells part of the story. But one of the things I think is the gift of qualitative research is that stories are data too, right? The stories that people tell you about, if I get a survey asking me how many times I go to the gym, I'm like, oh yeah, 5 days a week. Sure, I go to the gym 5 days a week, right? If someone were to observe my behaviors, they might realize, gosh, she's only actually going to the gym 2 times a week. Is that because of cost? Is that because of transportation? Is that because of childcare? Is that because I don't like the way the entryways, the locker room smells? Like, you don't know, right? So having a broader, more comprehensive idea of data analysis is very interesting to me, and that's a creative act as well.
Absolutely, I love that. By the way, I've never heard the phrase "worm's eye view." That's a new thing to add to my vocabulary. I have a lot of colleagues at the university who are anthropologists and who are ethnographers, and I am in awe of their patience and their persistence.
It's hard work.
It is very hard work, but again, the ability to get these insights. I've done statistical projects where we got results that seemed impossible. And we go like, we've got a correlation here that makes no sense at all. And I'm thinking of one project I did in particular where I was able to follow up with the participants. And because this was a corporate project and it didn't have to go through the IRB, people were not anonymous. I knew who they were.
Wow.
And I was able to, I literally called them up on the telephone and said, you said this, what's going on there? And I found out that 50% of the people misunderstood the question.
Right. It goes back to the questions we're asking, how we're framing the question. Is it asking what we think and hope it's asking? Is it going to get to the insight we're hoping it will get to?
And it was such, if I were to tell you the question, you would say, there is no possibility that a person would misunderstand that question, but that assumes that they're paying attention on a half-hour long telephone interview.
Right.
Eventually there's going like, yeah, whatever, moving along. But it was great to be able to follow it up and say, oh, it wasn't what we thought at all, which is something we never would have gotten from the quantitative. And so I appreciate that. Natalie, our time is up. And I want to say thank you so much for joining me. And again, we are doing this live, but the recording will be available immediately afterwards on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and on Facebook. And I want to remind people very quickly again, this is Natalie's main website, figure8thinking.com. And I want you to be aware of the Wonder Rigor Ideas Lab. And
February 6th,
and that there are preview versions of it that start tomorrow.
Yes, for free. Yeah, with a nice gift at the end.
And please don't forget, Natalie has generously offered a 20% discount, Boot Camp 20, for people who sign up for the Wonder Rigor Ideas Labs. And with that, Natalie, any closing words?
Just thank you. This was really an invigorating conversation. I so appreciate the time. Thanks, Bart.
Thank you so much. We'll see you again. Thanks. Bye-bye.